just find it so hard to be vulnerable. It feels like I give everybody else the best and then I leave myself the worst.
Whenever we leave ourselves to try to become that idealized self, it's a consistent form of self-rejection, because really what's implicit within it is who I am in myself is not enough.
I've done that so consistently that it's almost constant. It feels like I've got a different face for all of these scenarios. I've completely lost touch with how to get home to who I am.
Brings in an interesting question, which is well, who are you that isn't all of that? I'm Alex Howard, a therapist with over 20 years of experience working with clients. Welcome to In Therapy, where each season we follow one person on their therapeutic journey with me. Each episode focuses on a different theme, with added insights to make the lessons more practical. My hope is that by watching, you'll gain tools and understanding to help transform your own life. This season, we're diving into challenges so many of us face, like toxic self-talk, body image issues, low self-esteem, feeling unworthy or broken, and working through relationship or childhood trauma. My hope is that as you follow along, you'll gain tools and insights to help bring positive change to your own life. Last time, we learned about the troughs in Belle's life, the low points that pushed her into despair. These included suicidal thoughts as a child, the grief and loss of direction after her grandmother's death in her early 20s, and the recent breakdown of a relationship that left her feeling unlovable and lost. In this episode, we dive into the impact of rejecting your true self, how the inner critic often contradicts itself, and why asking for help is a vital part of healing. New episodes of In Therapy are released weekly, so don't forget to subscribe to stay updated. So how have you been since last week? I feel like you shared there's a lot that was there, and I imagine it was probably quite tiring afterwards. Just to sort of, I'm curious, how you've been.
Yeah, I think immediately afterwards I felt so weight lifted. Had said so many things that it felt like had been kind of just sitting inside. So immediate relief. And then later in the day, really, really tired. Yeah. Which I was expecting to an extent. Yeah.
What? Because obviously we talked about it a lot, and then I see the notebook, so I know there's been some reflection. Yeah. What have you discovered since last time?
I feel like I've been thinking more about how my brain seems to take over, my thoughts seem to take over, and when it gets to, I would call it the point of no return, it just feels like a kind of storm going on, but working my way through the materials that you sent over and learning more about the maladaptive stress response. And all of those things, it was starting to kind of piece together a lot of the puzzle, and it helped in that way, thinking okay, this isn't just my brain trying to bring me down. It's there's a reason behind this, and it's not my fault, or not all my fault.
Yeah, your brain, your nervous system, your emotional body are doing the best they can to navigate those very difficult and painful experiences. And then often what happens in life is we we notice and we struggle with the symptoms of that, but we often don't recognize that the intention behind those adaptive responses is to help us and support us. They're just not necessarily the most effective ways to manage what's happening.
Yeah. It's like it's trying to lower all of my expectations of myself to like zero in a way that, you know, then often the next day, after I've had a really down day, the next day I'll be like, oh, okay, well, I actually feel quite positive this morning, probably because I had a massive cry the night before. But, you know, because it feels like it almost lowers me, like it drops me down so
Yes.
low that really the only way is up. But when I'm in that low, it feels like that there's no way out.
Yes. What's the it that drops you down?
It feels like is another entity that's working against me, but I don't know what the me is in that. I don't know where I am in relation to my mind, if I'm thinking of my mind as a separate thing.
Well, I guess in a way what often happens is we get so normalized to our mind, our perspective, how we see the world, how we respond to it, that all of that stuff just becomes how we identify ourselves. But if that's all stuff that you've learned and that's all adaptive responses and so on, it obviously it brings in an interesting question, which is like, well, who are you that isn't all of that?
Yeah, and that feels like the missing piece for me, because I feel like, as I said last week, wanting to get to a place where I have more of a sense of my identity, a stronger sense of self, then that could battle the other side of this mind that tries to bring me down and does bring me down. Yeah, it feels like I don't have the strength to fight it off, or the sense of myself to go back to it and to fight it off.
Yeah, as you're talking, what's in my mind is that if we just conceptualize it a little bit more, there's you, there's the person, and we touched on this a little bit last week, the person that you believe that you need to be for other people to get your needs met, to feel safe, to feel loved, and so on. And then there's your inner critic, which is kind of policing all of this and trying to hold all of this together. Whenever we leave ourselves to try to become that idealized self, to try to become that, you know, that, as you mentioned last time, that sort of funny person that's there kind of entertaining others, being the helper of others, you know, always trying to sort of be successful, and all of those pieces. In a way, it's a consistent form of self-rejection.
Yeah.
Because really what's implicit within it is who I am in myself is not enough. So I need to become this to then be able to get those needs met. So it's a kind of constant form of self-harm in a way, which is constantly rejecting yourself to try to become something else.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that very deeply. I think that I've done that so consistently that it's almost constant, the like shifting, that any setting I'm in, work, at home with friends, you know, people I live with, family, it feels like I've got a different like face for all of these scenarios that I don't get. I've lost myself in that. I've completely lost touch with how to get home to who I am. That means that throughout all of that, you know, going place to place and shifting accordingly, or, you know, how I feel I have to, that then when I'm alone, all those thoughts come in. It's almost like shame. Like, okay, well, now I'm on my own, I'm not performing. Well, you know, I'm not happy with what's left. You know, I'm not happy with the me that I'm left with when I'm alone and I don't have to put anything on.
The challenge is that the you that's left is exhausted, right?
Yeah.
Because it's been constantly pecked at, pushed away, rejected, judged, beaten up by your inner critic. And so it's not you in a sort of wholehearted, self-loving, self kind of owning place.
Yeah.
It's the fragments of all of that self-rejection and sort of self-harm in a way.
Yeah. It feels like I give everybody else the best.
Yes.
And then I leave myself the worst.
Yeah.
And that is what I'm left with. And that is when, you know, on a day like Sunday, when I was on my own, then it all comes in and the inner critic is like, it's just savage.
Well, also, when we're constantly working hard to be the person that we think that we need to be, when that person is loved by other people, we don't really feel it.
Yeah.
Because the narrative is, well, if they really knew me, they wouldn't be loving towards me.
Yeah.
Or they love me because of this thing that I'm doing, but it's not really who I am. In a way, the sort of tragedy of this whole construct that we all can suffer with in different ways is the harder that we work to become the person we think that we need to be loved and safe and held and so on. And the further away we become from ourselves, it never works. Because even if we get everything that we think that we want, it's not touching our hearts, or it's not fully reaching our hearts, let's say, because it's always at a slight distance. And we're always slightly leaving ourselves trying to be a certain way. And that's why the more we can live as our authentic self, life becomes inherently so much more joyful, satisfying. We really feel contact with other people because they're contacting us, not contacting the construct of who we think we need to be. Imagine you've just spent a fun evening out with friends, but as you leave to head home, a wave of emptiness and low mood hits you. I was just having a good time. Like, why do I feel like this? Does it sound familiar? The effort of keeping up appearances can be draining, leaving us feeling disconnected. And this happens because in that moment, we realize our friends are interacting with a version of us that isn't completely authentic. This is where our inner critic often jumps in, ready to tear us down. In these moments, it's important to recognize how contradictory our inner critic can be. On one hand, it tells us you're not enough, don't show people the real you. But on the other hand, it accuses us of being fake. How could you pretend in front of your friends like that? The inner critic is irrational by nature, which makes it impossible to reason with. The sooner you can recognize it for what it is and start creating distance from it, the sooner you can embrace your true, authentic self. But for someone like Belle, whose inner critic runs deep, getting that distance is easier said than done. I'm interested, so part of the homework was to spend some time looking at the inner critic. I'm curious as to what you discovered from that.
Yeah, I mean, I made quite a few notes just on different things while I was working through the homework. The 21st. So yeah, Sunday. And I just that was a really bad day. And I was so aware of the critic in my head. It got so much louder. But I thought, yeah, I'll write down how I feel today, because this is the inner critic in its like purest form, like really coming at me. So, I mean, how much time do you have?
I got as much time as we need.
So, I'm feeling lonely and inadequate. I feel like I let myself down by putting myself in situations that make me feel lonely, and inadequate. I feel useless. My inner critic is calling me an unlovable failure. Today, I need to stay home and study, but my brain won't let me relax or focus. It keeps calling me fat, ugly, and unlovable. It keeps saying that if I was a worthy person, then I would be out with a boyfriend. It won't let me work, and then it calls me a failure for not working. I'm trying to let myself feel it all and be safe in my body and cry, but my brain is analysing it all and thinking all the time. It won't leave me alone. It's telling me that I'm stupid to think that I can get my degree. It's telling me that I'm stupid to ever feel pretty, that I'm stupid to think that anybody really cares about me and could ever really love me. It's telling me that I'm not strong enough to get through life like this and that I'm just not cut out for it. And that is so selfish for someone who is so lucky but just can't cope. It feels like I've spent my whole life admitting to everyone time and time again that I'm struggling. They must think that I am so broken, ungrateful, and useless. They probably pity me. Right now, my brain is saying you should be studying or out with friends or exercising or with a boyfriend or at least just relaxing and feeling grateful to be in my 20s in London. And instead, I'm just crying. What is wrong with me? I'm so ashamed.
How do you feel right now reading that?
It feels like that is all, like that is all the thoughts that I get scattered in throughout every day, all in one.
Yeah.
And
all in one onslaught.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just, I felt it. And I would usually just sit there and like listen to it all and, get lower, which I did, but I thought like, I'm going to get this down so that I can read it back and have like a coherent kind of list of, right, these are all the thoughts that come in, because it can feel like kind of unscrambling. They're all, all of that is happening at the same time. But yeah, it just felt, and even that, like I was feeling all of that, thinking all of that, wrote it all down. Like I was just crying. I was just in bed, so low. And then, my flatmate came home and came up to see me, and I was like, just fine. And
so you rejected how you felt to be the person you thought you needed to be with them.
Yeah, because it stems from that, when I said it feels like I'm constantly having to admit that I'm struggling, and I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be that person to other people. I know I'm too aware that I'm struggling, but I don't want to be that person to other people, because I don't want them to think that I just, that Belle just can't get it together.
But then what happens is you reject yourself. And in a way, in the fear that if you don't reject yourself and pretend that everything's fine, that they will then reject you.
Yeah.
But then what you're doing is you're pushing away support. Right? There is a difference between, and I think people, to me, it's an important distinction that people often don't realize. There's a difference between someone that is having a hard chapter in their life and they are owning that. They're doing the work, but part of the work is being emotionally truthful with the people around them. There's a difference between that and someone that is in a bad place that's expecting everyone else to fix it. When you're expecting everyone else to fix it, what's going on is someone is often not taking responsibility. They are kind of being a burden, and everyone else is doing the work to try and make that person's life better. In that case, one often creates toxic, problematic relationships. But in the first case, that's the human story. That we have good chapters of our lives and we have hard chapters of our lives. The more work we do in the hard chapters of our lives, the more good chapters we tend to get.
Mm-hmm.
We don't all get an equal start in life. We don't all have equal capacities and skills and abilities and so on. We get the lot that we get, but everyone goes through hard chapters. But we don't have to do the hard chapters on our own.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that we talk to others in those places, the more we actually build friendships that are built on depth and the kind of friendships that we actually need. Also, the more that we speak to people from that more truthful place, the more we invite them to do the same. If you're interested in learning more about training to become a practitioner in this same therapeutic approach I'm using with Belle, Therapeutic Coaching, you can find out more at therapeuticcoaching.com/intherapy.
I just find it so hard to be vulnerable. It's like my mind, it's like keeping myself isolated in those moments, which, it's what you're saying, like, but it's like my brain is like, no, we can work this out. We just stay
it's
up
almost
here.
like your inner critic's like, don't worry, we'll sort it out together.
Yeah. It's like, just stay up here,
It's kind of like being in a toxic relationship though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because your inner critic's like, don't tell anyone else. No, don't tell them. We'll sort it out together.
Yeah.
You need me, I need you. We're fine. We've got this.
Mm.
But it's like a toxic, abusive relationship.
Yeah. I'm constantly trying to think my way out of my thoughts. I'm trying to think my way out of my brain, which I know doesn't work because I've obviously been doing it for so long. But it's like, oh no, but maybe it keeps saying like, oh, but maybe we can problem solve this. Like maybe if we just, it's like the constant anticipating things that could go wrong or anticipating what other people are probably thinking, that it just, it keeps it all inside. It's really, to me, it seems really difficult to open up because, and sometimes there have been times where I've been really, almost where I can't help it. Somebody's come home and I'm upset or whatever. And afterwards I feel that kind of, I hate that they saw me like that.
But I think it's really important, this distinction of you're in that moment of vulnerability with someone. You're not asking them to fix it. You're not asking them to be your therapist, or you're not asking them to sort of be your rescuer. You're just expressing in that moment how you feel. And the more we're able to be truthful in how we feel, the closer we actually feel, but also how we feel is more likely to move. So one of the ways to think about emotions moving in the healthiest way are like water flowing in a river. When the river gets dammed or blocked, it's like pressure starts to build up. It's also where you're more likely to get bacteria building up and so on as well, because there's not that free movement. The same is true within us. The more we block what's happening, the more actually it builds up. And that's where you can get to that point where it's like a pressure cooker and then it becomes overwhelming.
Yeah.
What we want to have is that there's a more easy flow of what's going on, which means that, you can express to someone that you're having a really bad day and you feel really low and you feel really sad and you're still grieving the loss of your relationship and and you can have that truthful conversation with someone. But that doesn't mean that's where you are an hour later, or where you
Yeah.
are 3 hours later, or where you are the next morning.
Mm-hmm.
And often the fear we have is that if we really allow our feelings, or we really go into our feelings, it's like a bottomless abyss that we're never going to come out of. So we sort of got to hold on and keep it together and be strong to constantly try to avoid what we feel. And so this whole narrative has become that here is safe and here is unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that self-worth, self-love, self-esteem doesn't exist in your mind. It exists in being connected to your heart. And so when we disconnect from our emotions, or when we sort of close our hearts to ourselves in that way, we can't shut things down selectively. You can't sort of shut down the kind of the sadness, the anger, the rage, the hurt, and still feel all the kind of love and the joy and so on. It's like a kind of blanket shutting down of that. And so when we disconnect from ourselves, we also disconnect from that place of true self-esteem and self-worth.
Mm.
You know, and true self-esteem and self-worth is not often how I think it's portrayed in sort of popular culture, which is someone that is like super confident and like, check me out,
Yeah.
and look at me. And, you know, true self-worth is just really loving and accepting oneself the way that we are.
Mm.
In our strengths, our weaknesses, our vulnerabilities, our capacities, our talents, our failings, but just really loving and accepting ourselves exactly the way that we are.
Mm.
But that's being connected to who we are, and it's something we learn to do. It's a process, because often the instinct is we feel something and we judge it, or we reject it, or we pull away, and it's learning to stay closer to ourselves.
It was good to go into some more detail about my overthinking and to kind of try and understand why my brain does that in a way that's trying to protect me, but obviously doesn't really work. It was scary reading out what I'd written over the weekend, just because it was obviously quite raw and vulnerable, so that was a bit scary, but I do think it was a good summary of what my inner critic starts to tell me when I'm having a down day, when I get low. So yeah, I think that was important for Alex to hear. I'm gonna try and keep meditating as well, because yeah, that's what I struggle with, is stopping my head just going straight back into overdrive after I've meditated, so fingers crossed.
The resources we need are within us. But when we disconnect from ourselves, we're disconnecting from these inner resources. It's like the more we push ourselves away, the more deficient and the more needy we actually end up feeling. What Belle is actually learning to do is to slow down, to accept how she feels, and to connect to her inner resourcefulness. This process takes practice, it takes time. But when we do it, we learn that we do have what it takes to face the challenges of our lives. So I want to encourage you to sit with a question. What if when you feel like rejecting and hiding how you feel, you actually slowed down, took a breath, and really accepted feeling where you are?
My dad was brutal when it came to weight.
In a way, we can see the seed of the pattern we've been talking about around who do you need to be to get love and to get safety from other people.
My sister had a boyfriend before her now husband. He was in his early 20s. I was probably 13. He sent me some messages. Things like that, I think, just fed into the feeling of like, I'm not worth protecting.
The problem was never with you. The problem was with the environment.